today I'm interviewing Ainslie Grosser, which is just an amazing mix engineer. He's worked with some of my favorite artists for King and Country, The Afters, We the Kingdom, which are one of our favorites too. So, but I mean, you can go down and check out his all music page, and the list goes on and on and on. So he's just worked with some of the best in the industry, and I thought I'd get him on here and ask some questions about mixing and career stuff. And yeah, thanks so much for joining, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Well, dude, hey, where are you from? You're from Australia, right?
I am. Little short backstory. I was born in Perth, and my parents became missionaries at 10 months old to India.
Wow.
We lived in India, basically around Calcutta for about 3 years. And then we moved back to Perth and Western Australia and for the rest of my life until I pretty much moved here to the States in 2000.
Wow.
So,
what was that transition like, getting from Australia to Nashville?
You know, I was very, very blessed by I had done concert promoting in Australia for fun.
Yeah.
And I worked with a guy called David Smallbone, who is for King and Country's dad and Rebecca St. James' dad. Some people don't realize it's all the same family. Well, I worked with their dad when those kids were all little, doing concert promotions in my state. So when my life came to a bit of a crossroads, I interacted with David. Actually, they were on tour in Australia, and I bumped into him, and he said, hey, why don't you come and work on running a label for me? We always got on well. You always did well. And because I had said to him, hey, my life's kind of a loose end if there's anything you got going on.
Yeah.
So he invited me, and I came. And so, like I say, I had a leg up. I went and stayed at their house. Then they actually bought a house for me to set a studio up in Franklin. And so I did that until the city kicked me out, because apparently you can't be a tenant and have a studio in a house. You have to be an owner. That's Williamson County code is pretty intense, because there's so many people with studios in Williamson County. So so that's how I got here. Was they basically sponsored me, and then I actually won a green card in a lottery.
Wow.
Which enabled me to stay in a permanent way. So,
wow. Yeah, I know a bit of that process. You know, I'm from Canada, so I had to go through the whole green card deal, and it's quite the deal. You know, it's a long process too. You know,
it is. Well, and then I got married and became a citizen, not based on marriage, based on my own path in 2007. So
yeah,
I've had the fun of voting in many elections and learning things from an American citizen's perspective. It's interesting.
That's awesome, man.
In fact, check this out.
Dude, look at that.
got my American flag bathers on.
Full on American citizen now, man. That's killer.
Yeah, that's it.
That's great. Well, dude, how did you get into mixing then?
Great question. Kind of by accident. A lot of people I've bumped into, it's kind of a very intentional thing. It's the thing they wanted to do.
Yeah.
But I always loved the mix part of the process. And, when I was in Australia, I produced a lot of records and worked on a lot of things. In fact, my studio had lots of clients, including Paul Mabry, which is, one of the more famous Aussies here in the Christian music business, producer of Lauren Daigle. His first band recorded their records at my studio in Perth.
Wow.
Anyway, I always loved the mix process. And of course, in those days, mixing wasn't what it is today. It wasn't in the box. There was no way of doing it in the box. It was all reel-to-reel tape machines and big consoles. Yeah. And so, I started out working with other mixers on SSLs and, that was my preferred place to be, was
Yeah.
at the SSL. So in those days, it was much easier to, well, it wasn't easy. It was much more expensive actually.
Yeah.
But you'd book out the SSL room for a day, and they give you, it's 24 hours. Like, we'd get there at 6 a.m. and leave the next day at 6 a.m. Like,
Wow.
no sleep, just work through and we'd mix an entire record, because that's what our budget was.
Wow.
But of course, the production has moved so fast since those days. So anyway, how I got into mixing, that was my introduction to it, and that was when I loved it. And of course, I was deep in that mix process, because in those days, I didn't know what a producer was. I had no idea what the terms were.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just, but I was producing the records, and obviously the producer has a large impact in the mixing. So anyway, come to America. I'm working on this label. We get records done. I'm A&Ring records. That's basically what I'm doing. Well,
Wow.
I'm pretty much doing everything, but I'm A&Ring some records, and we have had the records mixed. The budget is used.
Yeah.
And the principal of the label is like, yeah, this isn't enough. It needs to be better than this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we already spent the money on some big name mix guys. And I'm like, I had worked in the music business my entire life. I'd worked in music stores. I had sold professional audio equipment to recording studios, and I'd done mixing myself. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to dig in. I've got time, and now I know it's in the box. I can just keep recalling it and make it better until eventually everybody's happy. And that's what I did. And I guess that's been my modus operandi ever since. And I guess the first song that I mixed for our label ended up doing very well at radio, and then I started getting calls from other people to mix things, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I love to mix. I'll do it, whatever. And so I never really, like I say, I mean, and I come from Australia where we're very self-deprecating and don't have high self-opinion, so I never really charge big bucks. It's almost like, hey, I'll do it.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay me. I'm no big name. But as time went by, I realized I've got to live. So it ended up becoming a professional thing, and I got so many calls. That's all I could do. And so but as I say, through that whole time, I produced many records in my own studio in Australia, and had really advanced in the box. I had a big console in my studio, but Pro Tools, Paris was another system. And then Logic Audio started coming out. And so these systems enabled you to mix in the box. And I was absolutely thrilled by that, because I liked the idea of living those 24-hour days that we spent on the SSL console. I listen to those records and I think, oh, if only I'd been aware, or I listen to my gut on certain things. There's always those things you wish you could change. So having recall, I was able to go back in history and change things. So I was so thrilled with that. So I was one of the first guys in this town in Christian music to really have any success within the box.
Wow.
I don't know if I pioneered. I mean, lots of people were doing it, but
you adopted it early.
Music,
yeah, you adopted
I was
it
a
early,
very early adopter.
Yeah.
I had my first radio hit in 2001, and it was Pro Tools. I mean, it wasn't even, HD had just come out. It was early days. It didn't sound anywhere near as good as it does now. But I always, as I said to people, I think the ability to recall, revisit, refine the creative, the feeling of it kind of outweighed the possible sonic advantage of all this analog gear. And now I don't think the sonic advantage is even there at all. But you have recall, full recall. And my other problem with analog studios, and I'm going off on a tangent.
No, I love this. Keep going, man. This is great.
Is that, a lot of people refer to the sonic warmth and, the distortion, the harmonic distortion, and this kind of grunge and crunch and everything that it brings. But, I'm the guy that the first time I heard Pro Tools record and replay an acoustic guitar, I'd never heard an acoustic guitar sound like that. You couldn't get it to sound like that on analog tape. it couldn't sound like that on analog tape because distortion was on everything. And it's like I would
Wow.
say an analog recording was like putting a set of glasses, tinted glasses, on everything. You
Wow.
didn't have a choice. Now in the box, we've got all those different glass tints we can put on each track.
You can
You
take
know,
them
we
back
can
off
add the
too.
colors. Yeah, you can add the colors and take them off. It's not, you don't
Yeah.
have to commit the color. That's not to say, I mean, obviously, so much of the plugins are trying to get that analog modeling, but now
Yeah.
you have the choice.
Yeah.
And the other thing I always had the problem with was with tape specifically was the noise floor. You know,
Mm,
it added up when you got a lot of tracks, especially when you started multing. So I think a lot
yeah.
of new people getting into the business are enamored by these amazing pieces of tech. Because I will say this, a big console and lots of outboard gear is so much more glamorous.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So much more glamorous. You walk into that room and you're like, man, I've hit the big time. This stuff is
Yeah.
amazing, right? But
Yeah.
but I don't want to work that way at
Yeah.
all when it actually comes down to the rubber hitting the road.
Mm.
Right now, here, I'll show you my studio.
Yeah,
This is
man.
I'm in the middle of finishing up for King and Country live DVD
Oh,
mixes,
nice, man.
and this is my studio right there. That's it.
Yeah. That's beautiful,
A
man.
little UAD box and
Yeah.
my laptop, and on the back of my laptop is the breakout box for
Oh,
the
that's
drive.
cool.
I've just velcroed them to the back
Nice.
because, you know, obviously another part of my story in recent times is going full-time RVing, and so
Yeah.
I really kind of refined mobile mixing, and I'll tell you, I don't want to go back. I do not want to go back into a room. I am about to go back into a room,
Uh-huh.
but I love, like, I often sit out here on the deck mixing, or even by the pool.
Oh,
And
that's incredible.
before COVID, I would go to coffee shops and mix right there, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. I saw that on your
wherever I
Instagram.
could be.
Yeah, I saw
Yeah,
that on your Instagram, like editing or whatever in a coffee shop and mixing. I mean,
yeah,
that is just
oh
crazy.
yeah,
And the way, computers are so powerful now, you can really do what you need to do, and it's a non-issue now. So it's incredible, man.
yeah,
It really is.
yeah. I often say to people, it's not the technology, and to anybody starting out, it's not the tech that makes you good.
No.
I mean, you can buy Logic Pro or whatever it's called these days for
Yeah.
$200, and the power in that
Mm.
is multiple times what I was mixing on an SSL, you know, with a 24 track reel to reel or 32 track reel to reel. You're way in front. I mean, you've got
Yeah.
compression, EQ, effects for days. You've got all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But any kid can buy that program. It's not. It's even not just knowing or understanding how to use it. Although that is a huge piece. It's it's stepping back from the tech and listening to the music and the
Uh-huh.
feelings of the music that actually matter the most. I've worked
Mm.
on some records like one act that really kind of slapped me in the face with this, where I would get too deep into the tech,
Mm.
uh, or would break preconceptions, was mute math. Okay,
Mm.
so Ted T, who I've worked with many times, of course, with For King and Country and many other acts over the years. Britt Nicole is one of the favorite ones I did with him
Yeah, he's
back
great.
in the day. But I listened to that mute math record, and it was so distorted. And it wasn't analog distortion; it was digital distortion.
Which
It
one? The
was
first
mixed.
one? Was it the first
The
big one?
Yeah, the big one that everybody loves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was largely mixed. Now, I didn't work on that record. I didn't start working with Ted until after that record was out.
Uh-huh.
But I did do the live version of that record where they
Uh-huh.
recorded in a club in New Orleans or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
And I think it was released on DVD.
Mm.
And you know, of course, the great thing about doing live records for me is you've always got the original record to kind of make sure it equals that or betters that in terms of the sonic quality and the energy, you
Mm.
know. So I would be referring to that, and I'm like, his thing is so clipped, and Paul Meany, who's an absolute genius, the lead guy from Mute Math,
Yeah.
largely mixed that inside an old Roland 2408, I think it was. I don't even know that it's 16-bit. It might be 24-bit. I don't know. But the digital technology was not what it is today.
Wow.
But what he got was a feeling.
A vibe, yeah.
And the feeling far surpassed what a purist engineer, which is what I saw myself as, somebody who prided good sonic paths. It was way beyond that. There were no good sonic paths in his mixing. It was all crushed and destroyed. And it added up to this amazing feeling. And I remember back in the day, and this is kind of, well, the internet was out, the World Wide Web had happened, but rec.pro.audio was a discussion board, and a lot of the big engineers of the day were on there, and they would, I remember one particular comment saying, "It sounds awful, but I love it." And I've always carried that, and Ted would say, "Oh yeah, we use this plugin on Logic. Some of it was mixed in Logic, some was mixed on that thing. You've got to put some distortion on the hi-hat." And I'm like, what? This was a completely foreign concept to me. I'm like, what? Because I'd come from SSL and from that kind of thing where you're trying to minimize the effects of distortion. His distortion was on everything.
Yeah.
And now he's saying you're going to put it on? What? So I just kept getting head spins. I kept getting head spins from people that had no or little engineering pedigree. I don't even know what question you asked or how I got there.
No,
but
that's
that was
great.
A little track I went down. And so I think a lot of new guys come in, and what far surpasses technical knowledge is raw feeling and talent. And a lot of guys that just pushing the faders up without doing anything, they create something that has something special.
Interesting.
Wow. And so other guys, like I remember bumping into a guy one time at a presentation I did one time, and he had bought, what's the name of it? It's like a $7,000 or $12,000 reverb unit, a Bricasti. He bought a Bricasti.
Yeah.
And he had bought the actual hardware box, and he sent me some mixes he had done. And I said to him, dude, honestly, the Bricasti. And he was talking to me about spending, several $1,000s on some converters, some really high-end converters. And I said, trust me, none of that is what you need right now. You need to lean into your creative aspects. That might make your mix 0.0001% better. What's going to make your mix 20% better is listening to where the vocal's sitting. Is how is your wife hearing that? How is, the lady down the road, the kids, like, they're not listening to certain spatial depths. They don't really care about any of that.
No.
They care, and another person once said to me, and I've repeated this a million times, I think it's super important, is, musicians, which is what I was a piano player, keyboard player. And I always look from that perspective. Musicians tend to focus on their instrument or their tones, like their guitar tone or their bass tone or their snare sound or the hi-hat or the beat, the way the beat's hitting and all that. The consumer and the purchaser of music is listening primarily to the vocal.
Interesting.
To the lyric, how it makes them feel. Beat would be second. And the tones of the instrument, they're so low on their radar of what makes the song appeal to them.
Yeah, wow.
Very rarely does it have much impact on them at all. And so we spend all this time working on stuff that isn't important in many ways. And a lot of, you've got to ask yourself, what's music about and what's it for you? And for me, I felt like it was a great way to put a message, to communicate something, to influence people, because
Yeah.
It's emotional and it's also intellectual. There's so many parts to it. It's spiritual. There's so many things. It has a great power. It impacted me, and so that's what I wanted to do with it. And yet you get into these rabbit holes of what is the guitar tone
Wow.
and
Yeah.
the drum tone, and that's where I think the people who are the most successful, especially in Christian music, is all about who's Billy Graham about their message.
Mm, that's cool.
That's what matters. And I don't want to cast dispersions on any of some acts I've worked with could care less about their production values.
Yeah.
I mean, they want it to feel good, but they're so focused on what they're saying,
Yeah, that's
on
good.
the lessons, and Christian music, the successful Christian music is that way.
Wow.
And so a lot
Interesting.
of people want to bag Christian music for being low on production values and all that kind of stuff. And sure, we should be good on production values, but primarily it's a message. It's not a
Absolutely.
style. It's not an engineering technique. It's none of that. It's a message, number one, and stick with that. So as you're engineering and mixing, remember that, and it will help guide you on your vocal rides, on your
That's so good.
presentation of the mix. You
Wow.
know,
That's great, man.
what matters. Yeah.
So would you
I,
say it's just an experience thing where you mix so much that you can finally kind of hear this thing in a more global way? When you're first starting out, I mean, this is how I felt anyways, and I'm still learning, but I was just so involved with the plugins and tweaking everything that I was so zoomed in on the audio that I wasn't really getting this global feel of what the song was trying to do. And
right.
I find the more and more I mix, I'm able to almost not close my eyes, but I'm just, how is this making me feel, and
Right.
forget about whether a plugin is clipping. It doesn't matter. I mean, if it sounds great, then go with it, right?
Right. The ends justify the means.
Yeah.
It's what I say about that, like that Mute Math record. The ends justified the means. It didn't
Mm,
matter that everything was clipping because it felt amazing,
yeah.
and it
Yeah.
is amazing today. You still talk to people about influential records. That's one that has had a lot of influence, and yet,
Wow.
so yeah, the higher the view, the better. Like, I'm always trying to step back and look from a high view.
Yeah.
What is, Becky is a kind of a character that the Christian music industry has kind of characterized their demographic
Uh-huh.
at radio is Becky. She's the soccer mom, the one who wants her kids to listen to Christian music
Uh-huh.
and who wants, high value, good value music.
Hmm.
And, I'm always trying to put myself in Becky's shoes. How is this going to impact her? And there are mixed moves that make a difference.
Yeah.
We do have, as mixers, an influence in that sphere. Of course, a lot of those choices and decisions are made prior in the
Yeah.
songwriting, in the production, and all that kind of stuff. But we can clear the production up
Wow.
in a way that will make the message more impactful, even if it's only a few percent. And like you said, the high view is the big thing. It's
Yeah.
not about whether the plugin's clipping. It's not about I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I spend a lot of time
Gain staging. Yeah.
trying to, yeah, right, get the, obviously that's the job, is to get the
Yeah.
balance right,
Yeah.
is to get everything pushing against each other to feel good. And yeah, the more you do it, the faster you get to it. And I feel like I'm constantly trying to get to a more macro view
Yeah.
of the mix and not the micro view. I feel like I start out at the beginning dealing with all the micro stuff,
Yep.
and you kind of have to, go through each track, filter it correctly, compress it correctly, or in a good way, in a way that feels good.
Yeah.
And then you start, and you're slowly adding the thing, you're building this mix. But you've got to kind of have an overview. In fact, the very first thing I do in mix process is I
Yeah.
just listen to the track. I make sure I get a rough 100%. Like, the first thing, if you send me a multi-track, the first thing I'll ask you is, can I have your rough, please? I.e., the
Yeah.
thing that you approved, the artist approved, A&R approved. I need the rough. I need to hear what people liked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because there's usually some goodness and gold in that you can draw from. And
Interesting.
so then I get a feel for the song. What's the song about? What is it? Where's the sonic space that might work for this? How's it going to communicate? What's the stylings? What do people do in this kind of genre that works?
Uh-huh.
Um, and sometimes I'll go out and listen to music. It's almost like method acting.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get, especially in urban and more programmed music, you've got to kind of get a method act, find out what people are listening to and what's working in that genre.
Yeah.
And so get the big picture, and then as you're adding the track, you're adding it with that mindset. Um, you know,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's
I
cool,
do
man.
remember a mix guy once said to me. In fact, the guy I learned from on the SSL back in the day, he would say to me, "Look, people want all this expensive outboard gear. I'll just mix with nothing but the SSL. In fact, I, you know, I don't even need reverb. I just need compression.
Yeah.
Give me some room mics and compression, and that's reverb.
Yeah.
Or even like one delay. I'll mix with one delay, like because in those days, reverb was the kind of the leading edge. People
Yeah.
had already kind of conquered. You had 1176s and Fairchilds and the onboard. You had lots of good compression and EQ, but reverb was in its infancy as far as especially digital reverb goes.
Wow. So was
And
that
so
like
everyone
Phil
was,
Collins when all the big gated toms and stuff like that?
oh yeah, I mean, oh, I mean, reverbs is a whole history lesson. We're so privileged now to have the
Yeah.
things we have. In those days, reverb was a lot harder than it is now.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other rabbit
That's
hole.
awesome, man. Well,
Mm,
hey, what are some, I mean, I listen to your records. I go back and listen to them. And dude, I just think you're such a killer mixer. And I'm
oh,
wondering, for a guy that's starting out, how can I or somebody else create a vibe? What's the key? You get the tracks, you get your multi-tracks loaded in the Pro Tools. What's your mindset for creating a vibe in the mix? Are there some go-tos, or is it just an experience thing, or how do you inject vibe into the mix?
um, that's a good question. I don't know that I necessarily think in those terms, and I'm trying to work out what terms I do think that gives the result that you're talking about. I There's so many important parts of the mix, but
Mm-hmm.
one thing I will say is I have this argument with myself. Should I use the same chain for each mix? You know, or do I need to come up, from original chains for each mix? Well,
Yeah.
I'm a bit in the middle because what happens is you become very familiar with plugins,
Yeah.
with certain chains, how they interact, how they work. And it doesn't happen in one mix. It happens over a period of time. So you really evolve a certain sound by using certain chains. And so like Waves and a lot of these guys, they put together these plugins that are artist series, and
Uh-huh.
it's the essential chain that this guy has used for years. Well, I've kind of evolved a little on that in terms of I have now with Pro Tools the preset list is just no, it's not called
Wow.
presets. What's it called?
Track presets or something?
Yeah, track presets.
Yeah.
I don't even think about it. I just use it. But
Yeah.
track presets has kind of been a game changer for me because what I've been able to do is when I've had a chain that I like and is working for me, I'm able to save it. So I've got 4 or 5 basic vocal chains.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with how it was tracked. I find that the certain vocal chains I use, if it was tracked by certain people, is
Uh-huh.
just going to destroy the vocal.
Wow.
But then there's other tracking chains that people have used that when I use that chain is magic.
Wow.
So I think the same thing isn't good always, but having and I guess this comes down to, my tool bag is deep because I'm old. I've got lots of tools in the bag that I gathered from through time, and by being pushed by guys who are perfectionists like Ted T. Ted T is my biggest, and I don't work with him all the time at all. I only work with him a little here and there, but every time I work with him, he's always pushing hard, and he's asking me to do things that I've never done. And I'm thinking to myself, I've been in this business a long time. I've never done that, but I will try it. And I think there's a couple of things I would say to guys starting out. Number one, criticism is your best friend. If someone will take the time, and if you can push them to get that critique out of them, it says, first of all, I care enough to give you the criticism, because if you just suck so hard, I'm not even going to give you the time of the day.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's actually a compliment to get criticism. It's not personal.
Yep.
But listen to it, and I've kind of gone to the point of, okay, let me start again and try it in a whole different way. Sometimes, if I get to what I think is good and the person doesn't like it, first of all, reference is extremely important. Like I say, the rough, but then also other things out there in the world, because sometimes the roughs are terrible, to be honest.
Yeah.
They're not good, and so you need some other frame of reference that they like, that will help zone you into the right place. So finding a vibe, I think, has something to do with reference. It also has to do with developing chains that you like.
Yeah, that's good.
That you have gotten intimate with. And then if it's not working, not being afraid to try some new things, or go with other chains. Save chains that have worked for you. It's funny. Some of the chains I have saved that have worked on certain mixes, I've never been able to get to work on anything else again. The other thing is the two bus. The two bus is, especially in today's age, is extremely important. I didn't understand it at the beginning of my career, but now the further I go, the more I realize, at the beginning of my career, a lot of people would ask me the question I would ask, well, do you mix with anything on your two bus? Of course, in this day and age, everybody does. But in those days, we're still working out the whys. People hadn't solved a lot of this. And what I realized was, I would get stuff back from mastering, and I'd listen to my mix that I sent to mastering and think, holy cow, what did they do?
Just destroyed.
It's destroyed.
Yeah.
And so what I realized was, I really needed to mix at the level that it would be mastered to, in terms of, having a limiter or compression and stuff on the two bus. This is extremely important, that your mix sounds close to a master, so there's no surprises when it is mastered.
Yeah, that's good. How loud do you send out your mixes to clients?
Oh, I send them at a full level. I send them at, so that, and this is you've got to have a lot of trust before I will take the two bus limiter off and send it to somebody, because you put it in an iTunes list, or you play it against a bunch of other material and it's way softer. Louder always feels better.
Yeah. 100%.
It sounds better to people.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got to be at the loudness that they are A-being other material with. Yeah. And that does create some difficulty, because this whole thing about vibe and feeling, some types of music certainly do not tolerate being that loud. The dynamics are gone. And this is a little battle I have. There are certain producers I work with that completely see way past how loud it is. There's others I work with who cannot, for whom it has to be loud. So, but I always find it's best to start
loud
at an equivalent loudness. And then if they're concerned about dynamics, say, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the two bus down a bit. We're going to let it breathe some more. And, just be aware that when you A/B it with other stuff, it's not going to be as loud. And usually at that point, if you've had that conversation, it's okay.
Yeah.
Everybody's cool. And then you get the mix you want,
That's awesome, man.
that everybody wants.
That's great. So going back to, you said you use track presets all the time. So in order for those track presets to work really well, do you clip gain all your individual tracks so they hit that preset well before you start mixing, or?
Depends. A lot of, because how can I say this? There's only kind of a handful of producers that I work with regularly, and their stuff, I know, that when it's been tracked well, I don't need to do any of that.
Yeah.
But especially sometimes in live tracking situations, the gain's all over the place. I do have to go through and kind of clip gain it to get it somewhere. But I'll have a my top plugins in the chain will often be gain staging.
Yeah.
Clip gain is awesome.
I love it. Yeah.
It is a great thing. It is a great leveler for sure. I don't know. I use everything.
Yeah.
I use plugins to make up the loudness. I'll use clip gain, whatever. When you're really in the flow of mixing, you're not really thinking about stuff like that. You just do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny, man.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about mix bus, man, do you mind, what do you have on your mix bus, and what do you like to start with on your mix bus?
I am, because obviously I grew up in SSL land, and I grew up with, if you look at the history of mix, go back to Bob Clearmountain is kind of one of the pioneers, because, he was mixing when the SSL, in fact, he's one of the guys who made the SSL a thing. And the SSL 2 bus has a bus compressor on it that is kind of iconic in a way to how things sound. So that's always present in my 2 bus. It may or may not be very active or influential. I always have, now in Pro Tools, for any Pro Tools users out there, a guy from Avid told me this years ago. He said, have all your faders at Unity with loud signal. You cannot clip the 2 bus. You cannot clip the bus of Pro Tools. And I was like, no, the bus clips horrible. And he said, no, what you're doing is you're clipping the input to your master fader. So you just keep pulling your master fader down until it's not red on the top.
Oh, interesting.
And at that point, you have a pure signal in your 2 bus.
I did not know that.
Into your master. Yes. So the very first thing I have in my plugin chain is metering, to make sure that what's coming into, because here's the thing, as soon as you put another plugin in, you've got metering post that plugin. So that plugin may be hiding the clipping that's hitting the top of that 2 bus. So you've got to have metering at the top of the 2 bus in a Pro Tools. If you're mixing in the box in Pro Tools, which I do, so at that point, I will have any plugin with metering, and I love the FabFilter EQs.
Oh,
so I'll have it because it's graphic analyzer in real time. It's a real time analyzer.
Yeah.
So Pro Q2, I've got Pro Q3. I haven't switched over to Pro Q3 on my 2 bus. I probably should do that, but because Pro Q3, for those who don't know, allows dynamics per band.
Yeah, wow.
It's phenomenal. So if you have problems, you can it's almost like a multiband. Now, I don't use any multiband compression on my 2 bus unless I have a problem.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, my beach house is next to a fire station.
Oh, no worries.
So we've got that. So after the EQ, real-time analyzer level monitoring, because the Pro Q2 has amazing level metering.
Okay.
So I'm making sure I'm not clipping my 2 bus at the top. In fact, I have found over time that I only want to peak at about 6 dB, at about -6 from the top.
Okay.
In fact, even going further down to -12. So it leaves my master fader down at about -12. That's where generally, if my master fader has to be lower than -12, I lower all my faders.
Yeah. Okay.
Individual faders. It's just something I've worked with the sound of Pro Tools, the way it works. So metering and EQ at the top, SSL, other plugins I've played with. I'm going to mention an oddball right now. There's a plugin from PSP called Mix Treble.
Okay.
And it has a great kind of pseudo widening thing on it. And
Nice.
I use that a little. Sometimes
Okay.
I do, sometimes I don't. It really depends on the material. It also sweetens the high end in a nice way sometimes. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good. And then, the FGX from Slate, I will use that sometimes on the tubas.
Yeah.
Again, that is a dangerous plugin. You can absolutely trash your mix with that plugin.
Yeah, the ITP setting can trash your mix.
The ITP setting. Careful with that. Gaining. I find that when that metering gets up to about -10, your mix is starting to get destroyed. All right. If you've got the metering on I can't remember the gain knob or whatever, it gets up to about -10. Back it down. Back the input. Even turn, either pull your master fader down further or pull all the faders down further. If you're finding yourself getting into that zone with the FGX, going the wrong way.
Yeah.
I've seen some guys run that up as high as -6 as its peaks, and I find that works only in certain styles, like certain hip hop and kind of crushed styles. Then at the bottom, something like right now, I'm a big fan of the Pro L2 from Fab Filter. And then, Pro L2 has some different settings on it, some different algorithms, modern, aggressive. And I tend to flip between those two most of the time. If it's something that's a bit more gentle or transparent, or, it works pretty good for me. And
awesome.
the big trick with that plugin is look ahead. If you find yourself sounding a bit distorted, try moving the look ahead back, so giving more look ahead. And also the attack and release on the transient connection is interesting to play with. For both for width and distortion minimization, because music was never meant to be this loud. I say it wasn't meant to be. The people who designed the dynamic range to start with, it never meant for it to be this hot where we're at right now. Because zero has to be zero. Like, people are pushing louder and louder, but what's actually happening is we're losing dynamic range. So whilst I talk about putting stuff out loud and I participate in that, it's something that doesn't make me happy. It's something it's the constant battle of how do you make this feel like it's super dynamic, like it's just hugely dynamic, but still be loud.
That's the trick, right?
It's the constant war,
Do you ever do any automation on your master fader where you pop down the verses, maybe like a dB? Do you ever do that?
Yeah, I do. Usually the way I do it is, and this is one thing about Pro Tools. Like I said, the master fader, if you're going straight into a master fader on Pro Tools, what you've got is a it's a pre-fade or post-fade. I do my terminal. I'm way off with this, but if you pull the master fader down, you're actually affecting the input into the top of the chain. So I tend to not automate so much the actual level of the master fader. I might automate the input into the Pro Q2, or I might automate the level of the threshold on the limiter, or something like that, like something else in the chain rather than the fader itself, because I still may wish to have that processing being hit to that level for consistency. But I do automate the master fader quite regularly, quite frequently.
That's cool, because I've been definitely doing that, but I need to look at that, right? Because I guess if I am bringing down that level, then it's changing the relationship between the mix and the compressor, right? So that's changing my balance a little bit, right?
Correct. Yeah, especially if you say your kick and snare and your vocal and your bass are hitting the SSL compressor, it's being bumped by all of that, and then you pull down your master fader, all of a sudden it's not being bumped as hard. So that's why I would tend to do the level of, for instance, the FGX or the
Okay.
L2 or something else post that.
That's awesome.
So that yeah. Now I will say, Logic users, if you're listening to this, you've got a whole different set of problems, right? because the way that their gain structure works and their metering, it's all floating point, and I will tell you, it's a, like, I've often had guys say, oh, well, can you mix it in Logic? I'll send you the session in Logic and you start where my mix is and fix it. And I have done that a few times. But when I get into understanding that, when I get into the bus related stuff, I'm like, oh man, you guys, it reacts so differently to Logic.
Wow.
It's like trying to tell an emotional story in French. It's not my first language. I can't do it. It's not going to be as good, you know.
That's awesome.
So,
man,
you know, and that's another thing I would say to guys. Don't, stick with the language you know. Like, don't, switching apps is a huge thing. It's not just like, if you're just starting out, you can switch around and see what you like. But once you've gotten with something, I mean, all of these guys have been around a long time. They're going to be around a long time. They're going to innovate. There may be small things or innovations that the other platform got to first.
Yeah.
But in the scheme of things, I bet you it doesn't make any difference to whether your mix is great or not.
Yeah, it's true.
Offline bouncing, Logic had it for years. I had to bounce everything in real time. I had to pay guys to come in and bounce on my stems in real time because I didn't have it. And now I've got offline. We got there eventually.
Yeah, that's great, man. Man, there's a huge debate. Everybody talks about Pro Tools and Logic sounding different, and some people say it doesn't. And I want to hear your opinion. I think I know what you're going to say.
It absolutely does sound different.
Yeah.
I will say this: pure audio engineering is much harder in Logic.
Wow.
Because now let me say this: I would like to see somebody who uses Logic not allow the lights to go red on their tracks. Because here's something I found in Pro Tools. Years ago, I didn't care about that. I just let everything go red, right? Yeah. I listened back to those mixes and harking back a little bit to what we said, they felt good.
Yeah.
But they could have felt better because I was introducing undesirable distortions into it. I wonder what it would have sounded like without that. But that said, once I started working out, I got better and better and better at it. I started realizing that the less of that distortion I had and the more kind of analog introduced intentionally distortion, the better it was doing. Now, when it comes to Logic, I'm getting, when I get sessions from guys in Logic, it's pegged. I mean, there's no daylight in any meter. Right now, if somebody would do some proper audio engineering in Logic, I would like to hear what it would sound like. I don't feel like I've heard anybody do a mix in Logic with proper engineering.
Interesting.
I don't know if it's the way that the metering is designed. I've often thought, one day when I feel like, because I actually love Logic. I used it for years as a programmer. And before I started mixing, I would produce acts in Logic, and then move it out to a multi-track or run it in sync with a multi-track because it was still tape-based. We'd run it in sync, so all the programming and some of the audio would come off Logic, but the drums and stuff would all be tracked on a sync tape machine because you didn't have the track counts in those days. So I grew up with Logic when it was really hard to use. By the way, it was super hard. It was a very geeky program. So, but here's what I would say. I've seen my multi-tracks mixed by guys in Logic, the very same multi-tracks. I've heard the same things come back. Now, they're different sets of ears. I tend to hear things a lot more clearly. Like, I want to hear things more clearly and not as mushy or kind of blurred. Yeah. I don't like the blur. I haven't liked the blurred lines as much. I want to identify the pieces in the mix.
Yeah.
And I find that on the whole, Logic is not, it doesn't sound as good if you want clarity, if you want definition. Logic does work well in certain ways. It's a softer sound.
Yeah.
You know, that
Pillowy.
I'm just, you know, I'm just giving you my perspectives
Yeah.
on material. And from what I think, because my ears and the way I tend to process things in Pro Tools would tend to leave it in a certain state. But I've heard other guys say that, so I come to that conclusion. And I think on the whole, the best engineers, the guys who really want to be precise with their audio, end up in Pro Tools.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's cool, man.
I mean, try to get somebody in Logic to edit drums with sample accuracy.
Oh, that's a nightmare.
You know,
yeah.
it's really hard. And trust me, I've tried because, like I say, I love, and Gerhard Lengling, he's the guy who wrote Logic, who started this company called C-Lab, which became eMagic.
I remember that.
Which was then purchased by Apple. You know, he is an absolute genius. He's way beyond any of us and understands all these things I'm talking about, and really kind of made the choice that sample accurate or, you know, really deep dive audio editing was less important to the creative process. And I think he's probably right. But for me, I like the Pro Tools. I want to be able to, I'll tell you, when I show Logic guys drawing the pencil tool to draw out a digital noise,
I did that the other day because I think I followed you on Facebook and I saw you do a demonstration one day, and I never forgot that. And I had a digital, well, I don't even know, it was just digital clip or whatever, did what you were saying, used a pencil tool and just drew it out, and it was gone, man. Incredible.
Yeah, it's a miracle. And there are plugins now that kind of have automated that process to a degree, but I'll tell you, drawing it is always better.
Yeah.
Than the plugin doing it.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I don't want to take too much more of your time. I got a couple more questions, if that's cool.
Go for it.
Man, one thing that I think a lot of people struggle with is getting a good relationship between the kick and the bass. Do you have any tips for making them live together happy?
I would say if this podcast has comments, let me know what anybody listening, tell me how you do it, because I will tell you that's an ongoing battle, and it's not there's not a simple answer. It's almost like, you know, every song has its own animal. You know, the fundamental frequencies of where the bass is hitting and where the kick is hitting are different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so diverse. There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
I tend to say this, and a lot of the music I mix these days is the subtrack. You know, the subtrack is running with the bass guitar, and that's a whole other dynamic, because generally bass guitars tend to be slightly higher in frequency than the kick. You know, the kicks will be putting out 30 hertz to 60 hertz to 80 hertz, depending on where it's tuned. And so it's got, you know, there's a lot of bump and movement down there. And then the bass guitar will tend to be a little higher than that, unless they're using a 5-string and they're really going down low. But by the way, I would say this to a lot of people, especially when it comes to radio: understand that the FM broadcasting technology doesn't transmit those low frequencies. So it's got to kind of work. If you put a high pass on your mix at 80 hertz, it's got to work like that. All that stuff down in the 60 to 40 to 20, you know, I see people winding up 20, and I'm like, okay, there was a 36-inch EV speaker a few years ago that you could put in a big box, and it kind of produced 20 hertz. And what it produced is just basically wind.
Wow.
Nobody else can produce that. Like, forget that. I actually high pass my entire mix up to 30 hertz. I high pass it.
That's
because
awesome.
nobody has any way. No AirPods can produce it. You know.
Yeah.
There
What
may
sort
be
of
some
slant?
high-end.
What sort of slant are you doing on that?
Just like a 12 dB slope.
Yeah.
So my Pro Q, my Pro Q2 at the top will have the first frequency is just high pass.
Yeah.
Because anything below that you're not hearing, but it's screwing with your mix. It's
Mm,
screwing with your mix. You can't hear it. Nobody can reproduce it.
but
It's just
yeah.
screwing with your mix. Now, a lot of stuff actually has the filtering built in, like the microphones, the electronics, but there are some synthesizers do not often have that filtered
Wow.
out. And some of the pitch shifting that people are doing is not filtering that out. So be careful, folks. Kids,
Wow.
don't use those frequencies. So getting the bass relationship right and the sub right, I think some of it comes down to how it's pushing on the two bus.
Yeah.
You just got to keep moving those faders, and a little bit of those two compressing against each other. When the kick is bumping the compressor and pushing the bass down a little bit is part of what makes it bump and work right. So,
Yeah.
but getting that right per song is very important. And so that's why I say, like, unless you really need sub-sonic bass frequencies in your mix, don't be too concerned about that.
Yeah.
Let your bass speak more in the 80, 100 hertz, and let your kick speak more in the lower, and then they will bump together. Now, I'm talking for traditional acoustic.
Yeah.
As soon as you get into electronic, throw the rule book out. There is no rule book. Just, I listen to some of that urban stuff, and it's so sidechained.
Yeah.
Like they'll let the kick sidechain the entire two bus,
Yeah.
where the whole two bus is just collapsing on
I
every
know.
kick hit. And that's kind of how they want it. And then they get the 808s that are combined pitch and kick in the same thing. I'm
It's
like,
crazy.
oh. So it's all crazy. None of it's wrong. That's, like I say, the ends justify the means. I really don't care how you get there, but let it push hard on the two bus is one thing I would say.
Yeah, that's great, man. Well, hey, what's your go-to for a vocal chain? If the first thing you will go to.
Again, I've kind of, back in the day, I was a big fan of McDSP. I used them on every mix with the E. They've got the filter bank, and I would use that. But the convenience of the real-time analysis with Pro Q2, and of course, there's kind of unlimited bands. With the Fab Filter, you just keep adding more. And now with Pro Q3, where you can put some dynamics on it, that's kind of the top of my chain. I again filter before you compress, because pops, all that kind of stuff is going to drive a compressor and take all the frequencies down with it. But if you can take, filter that stuff out first. So that's my first port of call, is some EQ.
Yeah.
And then I'll use some compression, and oh man, see, this is where my chain goes all over the place.
Yeah.
I've used, I like the Focusrite, which is I think it's free with Pro Tools these days. Focusrite, the red Focusrite. Yeah. Well, see, now I owned those boxes in real life when they were real, so I knew them before I entered the digital land. So I've used a bunch of the Waves artist series. I've tried them out. But the Maserati one, I actually really like the VX one from Maserati. I mess with that sometimes. I tend to turn the effects off.
Yep.
But just use the compressor knob, and the high frequency and the low frequency is fun to mess with on that. And I will give credit to Jordan Malowski for making me use that one time. And I kind of was like, wow, that's really interesting. And I've tried them all, the different artist series. And then there's the Abbey Road compressors. I've used those.
Yeah.
The analog channel from McDSP is still pretty much the last thing on every one of my things. A lot of guys say stick analog channel on the top of every channel of every track. I'm not that guy, but I do use analog channel quite a bit. I find it undigitifies it a little bit, undigitizes it a little bit. It does dirty it up just enough. Although that Maserati plugin's got tons of dirt in it. And often I have to remove it and go with some clearer. The CL1 from the UAD TubeTech model, again, a product that I loved in the real world, and it is good. Now with my portable rig, I'm tending to only use that if I really need to clean up something,
Mm.
because I've got very limited UAD resources,
Uh-huh.
which I'm happy with. I don't think I need UAD to be a great, to do a good job.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my vocal chain. Now I will say this: I'm more of a believer in verbs and delays and everything being on buses and shared, and that's kind of goes all the way back to my SSL days, where that's the way I grew up.
Yeah.
The modern way, people are sticking reverbs straight on the vocal channel, and delays and stuff straight on the vocal channel. And you see
Uh-huh.
these Logic guys with 15 plugins on their vocal channel. I'm like, why don't you just, you could have put that on a bus and shit, because then they'll copy that across to every vocal track, right?
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
you could have just put that on a bus. And
Yeah.
now, having fought against that for years and tried to use buses, I have realized that it's sitting on the channel works differently in the mix, in the two bus compression, than it
Mm.
does on a bus. And so sometimes there's a certain level of wetness and feeling of the verb that you can only get by sticking it on straight on the track and not on a bus.
Wow. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing I've noticed too is, if you have all your effects on the actual channel, um, sometimes I find that the effects are what is making my mix muddy. And so if I have
yeah,
all of my effects going to its own submix, then I can actually EQ that separately and clear out some mud if the mix is getting muddy there.
absolutely. Absolutely. And that is one of the reasons I do resist putting it straight on the track.
Yeah.
It's mostly verb that I sometimes find putting it straight on the vocal,
Yeah.
just changing the blend. And most of the verbs have EQ built into them, so you can
Yeah.
do high pass and stuff, and then the mix, obviously the mix knob. But on the whole, I prefer to have it all on the bus. So when you talk about vocal chain, then I've got all the effects, and I'm a big fan of Echo Farm,
Oh yeah.
Revibe, TL Space, all of the modeling plugins. I've actually really enjoyed. Oh, now I can't think of the name of it. It's Slate Distribute.
Is it?
The lustrous plates.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
They're actually really useful. I'm using them a lot on drums and some on vocals.
Yeah, that's great.
So yeah, but Revibe, for anybody who owns Pro Tools, Revibe is a spectacular plugin. It's so powerful.
Uh-huh.
Very, very clear. You can make it as clear or dirty as you want, but all of my buses have EQ and compression on the effects return buses.
Okay. Gotcha.
You know,
I've actually never
every
used
single
that
one of them.
plugin.
Yeah, Revibe. It's a great. You can just start with the presets and mess with it. I've
Yeah.
made a bunch of my own presets. In fact, I shared some of them on social media. I gave some of them away.
Uh-huh.
Just like there's a massive verb, which is kind of like Valhalla vintage verb.
Oh, so good.
That I made a preset for the Revibe that's like the Valhalla before Valhalla was ever out.
Uh-huh.
And when it came out and I listened to it, I thought, wow, that sounds just like my massive verb. So,
That's funny.
but a little clearer, just a little clearer.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to get a mix just a little dirtier, what are your go-tos? Are you using like, Decapitator and SansAmp and stuff like that? Or what are
Oh
your
yeah,
go-tos? Yeah.
all of those. I will say this: if you're trying to make your bass work,
Yeah.
going back to the previous question, SansAmp, killer, because it actually eradicates the sub stuff.
Wow.
The
Okay.
extraneous sub stuff is eradicated from it. You still have the 3 distortion knobs. I can't remember. The middle one's punch and crunch, and then
Yeah.
the lowest one, I can't remember what it's called, but the lowest one is kind of the low end part of it.
Yeah.
But SansAmp is spectacular on bass. I find it's too much for other stuff,
Uh-huh.
but Decapitator and Devil Lock are.
Yeah.
I will stick them on half the tracks in my mix in the end. And I will say this: when I've had, I especially remember Mark from Casting Crowns, and that he's like, I want my vocal to be just a little dirtier, and I'm like, well, I'm going to put something on your vocal. I don't want you to be offended, because he's
Uh-huh.
sitting there watching me, right?
Uh-huh.
And up comes Devil Lock, and he says, "You put the devil on my vocal?"
That's
You know,
hilarious,
I'm
man.
like, well, I hopefully you can get past the name of it. It's actually based on an old Shure leveling device, a broadcast leveling device
Oh wow.
that when you abused it, it got distorted. So yeah, and I remember that back in the day, thinking, what a stupid piece of hardware, and now I love it.
Wow,
You
that's
know,
amazing, man.
one of my go-tos because it's got the mix knob. You have to get Devil Lock Deluxe, and
Yeah.
a lot of those plugins from Sound Toys, you've got to get the deluxe version to get the mix knob. You need the mix knob, and if you combine Devil Lock, oh, and same with Decapitator, using the darkness,
Yeah.
uh, use darkness and the mix knob combined. For
Uh-huh.
instance, on an organ that, for instance, was perhaps a digital organ that someone recorded, didn't sound anything like a B3,
Yeah.
but they're trying to sound like a B3. Put the Devil Lock on it, make it dark, put the mix back to like, I don't know, 20% or whatever the knob is, and just keep pushing the crunch up, and you'll be like, what it's actually doing is just distorting the low frequencies, not
Wow.
the high not the high
Uh-huh.
digitally sounding distortion. It's that warm speaker thing that happens with a Leslie speaker.
Uh,
It's the low frequency fuzz.
Interesting.
Just that part of the sound is distorted. So yeah, I mean
Wow, that's
that's
cool.
two go-tos. There's Waves have some new distortion plugins out that I've been playing with, and I do like. They haven't become my go-to yet, but that's kind of on the leading edge of my new things to try.
Yeah, totally.
So
Well, dude, okay, so all these new engineers and producers and songwriters that get into this. I mean, we don't do this for a Grammy, but it would be nice. And I'm just curious, what is when you first got your Grammy, did it change your mindset? Were you like, man, I feel validated? Did that change anything for you, or were you kind of always going towards that, or what? You know?
Here's what I would say, and this is a much bigger life question. Whatever that thing is that you really want in your life is not going to give you satisfaction.
Mm, wow.
Until, as a Christian, I'm more of the belief that, higher spiritual values that Jesus talked about actually are far more fulfilling and matter.
Mm,
And, I've kind of, my wife tells me I'm having a midlife crisis right now, but it's kind of actually been going on. It's kind of actually been going on for years and years, and it's kind of really re-examining what matters.
mm,
And it kind of started in 2014 when I got the Grammy for King and Country.
yeah.
I was riding high.
Yeah.
The Grammy was a bonus, an unexpected thing. I was
Mhm.
the only person from the For King and Country team that was actually there when it was announced, and it was it was an emotional experience that I've never had
Wow.
before because
Mm,
it was unexpected.
yeah.
But what I found as time went by was um, it's kind of a two-edged sword. It was kind of a back of my mind goal, but not an expected goal to have a
Mm,
Grammy one day.
yeah.
But I think as with all things in life, you've got to find things that actually really matter in the long term.
Mm,
And having a Grammy doesn't matter.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, on your tombstone or your legacy. I mean, there's some kind of legacy, but there's a song I mixed for Casting Crowns called Only Jesus, I think, and the chorus starts out. Basically, it's I don't care about legacy. I don't want to leave a legacy. I just want to be known. It's only Jesus. That's what matters. Legacy
Wow.
doesn't matter,
Mm,
and that's so counter to the world's values. And so, when you talk about Grammys and things like that, they're nice, and I think that they are great things to honor
yeah.
those who are doing great things. It is a great community thing.
Mhm.
I'm not downplaying the Grammy thing at all. But
Yeah.
what I am saying is, no matter where you're at in your career, uh, always be analyzing what you think is going to give you satisfaction.
Mm,
Obviously, most people will say, "Oh, no, it's not things." I know
Yeah.
things aren't going to bring me happiness, and yet we live our lives like they will.
Wow. So
And
true.
so I'm challenging myself on that all the time, and trying to reevaluate those things. I mean, the happiest people in the world that I've ever met are little kids playing in poverty on the street in Calcutta.
Wow.
They're just
Crazy.
happy,
Yeah.
you know?
Unbelievable.
And so yeah, Grammy's not going to make you happy is the first thing I'll say. And basically very little will until you find the values that Jesus talks about in the Beatitudes, in all of the things he spoke about. That's kind of more the secret to
Wow.
happiness and success. You know, people often think success will bring happiness. No.
Yeah.
What's your measure of success? You know? So
That's so
I
good.
just put that out as a challenge, because for me, I never really worked. It was an accidental thing that happened.
Yeah. Wow.
Just
That's
on the
crazy.
side, and it just brought some extra joy, you know?
Wow. Man.
For a moment.
Yeah, totally. That's such a good thought, man. Do you have any advice for an up and comer that is, struggling to kind of break into the scene, and, does location matter? What should he be doing, to really try to get his foot in the door?
Well, as somebody who's kind of unplugged from location,
Yeah.
I will say location does matter.
Yeah.
But what matters more than location is relationship, and relationship kind of needs location to start with.
Yeah.
So I've often, and by the way, anybody who's in Nashville, you're starting out in your career, feel free to look me up, message me. If I don't respond, I'm sorry. If I do, and I will hang out. Well, let's hang out, and I'll take you to coffee and we'll chat.
Yeah.
But the one thing I'll tend to hammer them with is relationships. And I say this as somebody who's not done it well. There are other guys in town, and I have huge respect for Sean Moffat, who has developed relationships that are so deep. The amount of guys who say to me, he's my best friend in the world, is pretty incredible. And I give him credit for that, because it's genuine. I'm not talking about it being fake or anything, but you've got to be genuine, and it's difficult for those who aren't extroverts.
Yeah.
That's a very formidable thing. So, and I don't really see myself as I see myself as a one-on-one guy. I'm good with one-on-ones, but get in a large group, I'm a little more, that's not as comfortable.
Yeah.
But the more you can hang with the people that are creating, they could be bands, they could be producers, they could, writers, whatever it is, you've got to start out doing stuff for nothing. Hey, could I have a go at mixing that multi-track?
Yeah.
Would you mind if I had a go at it?
Yeah.
And eventually you get to a point where you do something and the person goes, dang, hey, we'll use it. And you always do it from the perspective of, look, I'm going to mix it for nothing. If you use it, pay me. If you don't.
Yeah.
But at least I got to learn along the way on a good quality multi-track. So just build up relationships and trust in that way. And I mean, sometimes that happens by the guys you meet at church. Yeah. Sometimes it's by going to gigs. A lot of the guys start out by going to gigs. Of course, in this whole COVID time, who knows how this is going to look like?
I know.
I mean, what an absolute mess. I was saying to my wife the other day, she's like, you need to go start having coffee with your buddies again. And I'm like, yeah, I do. We're all stuck.
I know, it's rough.
All the relationship thing is suffering. And then when you're in my position in life, I prefer to work than have relationship. That's a mistake.
Yeah.
I should be doing more relationship, way more of it. And so I say that to everybody starting out, do more relationship. My relationship for King and Country's father and then the kids themselves is what has me doing that work.
Wow.
It wasn't because I was the best mix guy on the planet. Yeah. I just worked with Jolie making hundreds of demos. Yeah. And eventually that relationship built to a point where they trust me. They know how to communicate with me. They know how to get from me what they want, because we've developed a relationship over time.
Mm.
And I will tell you this, develop relationships with people who aren't famous.
Yeah.
Guys who are starting out.
Yeah.
Like yourself, because some of them will go on and be successful. Some of them won't. But this is another thing I say, don't do it for fame, because fame will let you down. Do it because you love the creative process, you love the music, you love the message. Do it for much higher values than any of that. Keep asking yourself that each time you make a choice about what you're going to work on and what you're not. Each connection you make, often in the back of your mind might be the thing, oh, why should, I can't be bothered with this person because they can't give me anything.
Yeah.
Mistake that. Whenever you feel that in yourself, kick yourself in the tail and double down with that person.
Yeah, totally.
Because they are a valuable human being that have something.
Yeah.
That's what I'm just saying. Relationship number one.
That's
Can't
so
beat
good,
it.
man. Well, dude, hey, thank you so much, for being so generous with your time. And also I want to thank you. You really opened the door to me, I called you up and we kind of knew each other through, who was it? Through Lucas Perry, right?
Yeah, Lucas Perry.
Exactly. And you just had me over and I was asking questions about mixing, and then you called up Ed Cash and hooked me up with those guys. So I'm really grateful for that. And I really, really thank you, man. It's really,
absolutely. I'm glad that worked out and that was something to do. And those relationships have helped you, right? Relationships.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
All that relationship stuff. Yeah.
It really is.
So, well, thanks, mate. I appreciate you doing this, and I hope anybody that listens has picked something up and learned something.
Absolutely, man. How can people get up with you? Just on Instagram, Facebook, or?
Yeah, just follow Instagram. I wish I knew my handle. I can't remember what it is. If you just,
I'll post it. Yeah.
Okay, you post it. I think it's just at Ainslie Grosser, or Ainslie G.
Yeah.
Facebook, and then Facebook. Just search me. They can add me there if they want.
Awesome.
I pretty much anybody who's got gear in their profile, or that they're into audio mixing, or they're a writer or anything, I'm gonna add them.
Awesome. Awesome. Right. Thank you so much, Ainslie. Have a great day. And,
all right.
We'll talk to you real soon. All right.
Take care.
Man.
Thanks, mate.
Bye.
Bye.